My name is John Andrew Williams. This is the Coaching and Flourish podcast. Today we have Katie Hurd, who has been through and is an ACC coach at the ICF. You also have an impressive background in global business and helping global leaders. Was it from Boeing and Unoco? Am I saying that right?
Yes, so it's actually Toray Industries. Yeah.
And what you've done is, so based in Japan, but you've done seminars across the US and Europe. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So I'm so curious, how did you get into that? Because it sounds like one of those dreams that you have, when you're in middle school, they say, what do you want to do in your life? You say, I want to be an international business person. And then you are this person. How does that happen?
Well, I was thinking today, how do I even tell this story? And it's the same challenge I always have, because I think I was like one of those people who was so into Sailor Moon and so into the culture side of things. But then my first part-time job in high school was helping out at a local university with their Japanese, summer study abroad students.
Oh, that's so fun.
And so, yeah, it was like the best part-time job you could possibly have compared to like the other things I did, like weeding gardens and watching babysitting was fun. But like to be able to show, people who just come to the States around and be like, this is America, and take them like horseback riding, and they would teach us how to fold origami and stuff. And so it was just like that first really intense kind of intercultural experience for me, with like not being able to really communicate with them because they had studied English for a long time, but the spoken English in Japan, the education here is not quite as advanced. So they would have all this knowledge in their heads, and now it was just a matter of trying to get it out. And so it was really interesting for me. So I'd be like saying konnichiwa and trying a little bit of Japanese with them, and they'd be using English, and just that cultural exchange really, I think, leveled up my desire to live abroad. And yeah.
So imagine you went into college and studied global studies and went into that path. And what was the most surprising thing as you got your first, into it, and I guess you started your first jobs?
So it actually, a lot of it, I see it so differently now that I'm a coach. Like coaching has really broadened my horizons of my past a lot. I had kind of a really big traumatic incident in my life when I was in high school that really had a deep effect on me. And it kind of made me feel like, oh, am I doing the right thing? Do I still want to do this? And so my first year in college was also kind of very shaky start. Like, ooh, is it the right thing to study Japanese? Am I going to want to work in Japan for the rest of my life? And so I didn't really suddenly have confidence in myself for a lot of my university years, but I was still doing such interesting things and just like, you know what?
So cool.
I'm just going to go with this. I'm going to do my best. And so I studied abroad in Japan for a year and got my first taste of like the good culture and also the culture that's a little bit more difficult to handle, and came back and I was like, well, that's okay. I can still use Japanese in the States, and trying, more thinking about how to build my career in the States, but still use Japanese. And it's really funny because now I teach my clients this type of stuff, like the stages of culture shock. And I was definitely in that state of like, I need to get out, I need to escape at that point in my life. And now I've kind of worked through, and I'm at the last stage, which is the adjustment stage of culture shock, where it's like Japan is home now. But at that time I was so like, how am I going to make this career work? I graduated in 2008, which was also hard because my microeconomics professor, one of the things he said in class, because most of my classmates were freshmen, was, you guys are really lucky none of you are seniors because you don't want to be looking for a job right now. And I was like, hey, we're here. So it was kind of like one of those things of fate, because I just had a really hard time finding a job. I actually went to university. I think you guys are based in Portland. Is that right?
We were in Portland for a decade, and then we took a 15-month RV trip around the US, just
cool.
Wherever. And now we're in Hood River, so we're about an hour east.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Well, I went to school for 3 of the 4 years in Forest Grove.
Okay.
So yeah, so not far. And then I came back after teaching English a couple years in
Okay.
Japan, and I was working a year in Portland. And during that time, I met my husband, who is Japanese. So it was kind of like I came back as like, I'm done with Japan. I'm going to try to use Japanese in a job because that's my specialty in this international skill set. And met my husband, who had to go back to Japan to complete his degree anyway. So now I came back, and through a long series of events, we're very happily settled here. We have our little son.
Fun.
I bought this house, actually. I'm really proud.
Oh, congrats. So you can't get away from Japan.
Tokyo. No, I can't
Japan
leave now.
got you.
I'm stuck here.
They brought you there. So that's amazing. That's, I mean, and that's, so, even in your bio, as a bilingual cross-cultural transition coach, which totally get like the value in that, because it is like cultures are shocking. Like when you find yourself in different places, and you've been in both. When you come back to the US, what's that like?
There's definitely reverse culture shock there. And I think a lot of people have similar experiences with that, especially when you think you're moving back for good. Like the first month, you're so happy. Like just seeing Mount Rainier on the drive towards my dad's house was like, home. Like that view was just amazing. And then just like going to the supermarket and driving a car on like the big wide roads, and it feels very free. There's other things that you're kind of like, oh, that's different as well. But after like a month or two, I think a lot of people just start to miss Japan a lot in different ways. So yeah, it's funny. Like, and I think the best part about the States when you're coming back is the social aspect for me, because society here is just socializing here is so different compared with in the States. In the States, I think it's more of like, oh, you're my colleague, you're my high school friend, you're my colleague, anyone can come and join a party or have a barbecue or something. And I don't think people tend to be like, oh, who's going to be there? And like, how's that going to go? And how long is it? And when do I show up? And it's more just like, you can show up whenever, anyone can come. It's more relaxed. Whereas here, it's very group oriented. So if my husband goes out with like a bunch of friends from university, I would never expect to go, and he probably wouldn't ask me in the first place. So there's quite a bit of friction when I first came back, because we had met in the States and he's so international. And then suddenly he got into this job working in a very traditional Japanese company. And it's almost like he changed into a Japanese salaryman overnight. Wow. So like that was also like, whoa, what is going on? Where did my husband go? Or he's my boyfriend at that time. What is going on? Like, on the other hand, suddenly he understood me a lot more, because he was in his 4th year university when we came back, and I was working at a Japanese company and complaining to him quite a bit. So once he started working, suddenly he could see everything that I was experiencing and understand it. But now he was in the thick of it as well, and adjusting himself to that first job in a really traditional Japanese company. So it was almost like then I was guiding him and also being like, stop complaining. You never listened to me when I complained. Like, don't you remember?
Right. Yeah. This is how it goes. Wow. So I'm also curious, because we've trained people from all over, and I've given talks, a handful of places, like, most recently was in India, and that was wildly different from the US. And coming back from India after 2 weeks, I mean, I just felt it. But I'm also curious, when you're coaching, it feels like once you get through a crust of culture, people are surprisingly similar, but not always. What are your thoughts on that? The differences in coaching people from, US, Japanese, like what do you find?
So I have to say, I'm really lucky to have the cross-cultural background, because I actually coach people from all over the world. Many of my clients are actually American, but I also have coached people from Europe, places all over Europe, India, a lot of places in Asia. Yeah, so everyone is different. There's also like the language barrier in some senses, because even when people can speak really high level English, sometimes if we're doing it over Zoom, for example, it can be a bit more difficult. So those clients I'll tend to try and meet in person, although it has been a bit tricky this year because of COVID. But we'll try and like meet up outdoors and keep our distance, just so that we have that connection. So But yeah, for Japanese clients, I actually attended an ICF local chapter meeting recently. And one of the things someone said as a Japanese person being coached is that American coaches can tend to talk too much. So they're like, this is my time. You need to be quiet and just ask the questions. And so I thought that was a really interesting observation. I haven't actually coached that many Japanese people yet. I've coached a couple Japanese clients in English and, mixing in Japanese as we go. But my impression is that a lot of Japanese people don't know what coaching is. So you need a little bit more explanation in the first session to really clarify the boundaries and what the alliance is going to be like. And so that otherwise they can tend to want to get it right. It's really funny. A lot of my clients actually, when we do the Enneagram, they will say that earlier in their life before they moved to Japan, they were a different type. But after working in Japanese companies and working in Japan, they've become a type 1.
That's my impression of the culture in the very limited contact I've had, but always, we've had a couple participants to go through and they have been the most precise, polite, kind, extremely, wanting to get it right on their, certification application, for instance. And it's like, well, you can write whatever you want. I imagine there's a conversation of, well, it's your show. You can answer however you want to answer this kind of question. That makes sense. Where do you see the state of the coaching field in Japan compared to?
So I've been talking to a ton of people recently. I've connected to like 30 different coaches, I think, in Tokyo now, just trying to figure out what a coaching business is going to look like here. My goal this year is actually to reach out to more Japanese clients and to work with more Japanese clients. I've got 3 peer coaching sessions set up next week to start working with Japanese coaches. I'll be coaching them in Japanese and they'll be coaching me in English so they can practice and I can practice. So it's a great relationship. But that should get me really, really confident coaching in Japanese. But I've heard that the business here is kind of like maybe 10 years behind what it is in the States and maybe some other countries. So it's still really building here. There's not a lot of coaches. I remember when I was first looking at registered coaches on the ICF website for Japan, only like, I don't know if I had filtered it to ACC or PCC or what, but only like 100 some people came up, coaches. So it's still really early on, but I feel like the demand is growing and growing. And so one thing I always say when I meet other coaches is like, we have to connect, we have to build awareness because that's the most important thing right now. If we can get more awareness, more people will reach out for coaching because they'll see how valuable it is. And I think that can bring a lot of growth. So it's a really great time to actually be starting a coaching business in Japan, especially if you can speak Japanese as well.
Right. I mean, I think I was surprised. I had a couple of talks in Switzerland in May of 2019. Time is weird. It's like odd. What was that time warp zone? That was before we could travel and meet people in person. And I was surprised in Switzerland. I thought the coaching field would be more advanced than what it was. They knew about it, but it did feel like the US 10 years, maybe even 15 years in the past. I'm not surprised that Japan's in the similar ballpark, but to me, it feels like that's just a huge opportunity. We know that coaching works. I imagine those ICF meetings are electric, that there's a sense that we're on the tip of something big and we need to share it. I imagine there's excitement. Anyway, so imagine there's an excitement there with what you're up to. Where do you, you in your journey, 2-3 years from now, where do you see your coaching career going?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's so hard to read. I think between having the cross-cultural background and my HR background and now having this ACC credential, there's and I've been networking like crazy. I've also been doing a lot of the stuff that I think new coaches do regardless of what niche they're in, which is, posting on Instagram and doing Instagram lives. And I'm starting a YouTube channel and doing all these types of things. Whereas normally I think I would go to a lot of networking events but there's just not a lot going on this year due to COVID, unfortunately. But because I'm doing kind of a bit of everything and seeing what's working and what's not working and seeing things come in, I'm just seeing so much opportunity. Like there's so much opportunity doing individual coaching, doing coaching. I originally wanted to help people because I mean, I haven't talked about it much, but I've struggled so much in like this past 15 years of moving back here 3 times, or moving back here twice. I've moved here 3 times, and going through that again, that feeling of kind of losing your family and having to rebuild a network of people and adjusting to really challenging jobs that I've had, and you know, being able to work with such a variety of people. And so I know that that's not an experience that's, you know, just my unique experience. I know a lot of people are probably going through similar things, and yet a lot of them maybe don't have that support. If you come here and you start a Japanese company, and some of them you might be working like 70 hours a week or more, you don't have a lot of time to meet other people. So it can be quite isolating. And that's true whether you work in a Japanese company, like an organization, or if you're like coming over as an English teacher in some cases. So like in that terms of that support and also helping people figure out where they want to go in their career so that they can get through the hard times, I think there's so much potential there and so much value in that service. On the other hand, a lot of the people I'm working with now are actually not even in Japan yet, or who lived here in the past and want to move back and they're really excited about it, have been reaching out to me and like, help me move to Japan. Like, let's make this happen.
Such a need.
So yeah,
There's
so
such a
that's,
need for what you're
yeah.
describing. And I heard, I've worked with a couple of coaches in Dubai who are expats, and they talk about not belonging anywhere. Like they don't really belong in
Mm-hmm.
the new country. They don't belong in their old country, and their little ones don't feel like they belong. What impact does that have on, you have a little one, what impact does that have on your little one? But it's slightly different because you're there, you're
Mm-hmm.
in Japan. What's that like?
Yeah, it's that kind of third culture kid. Well, in my son's
Right.
case, you know, he's half Japanese, so he can really identify with his Japanese side. But there's also some people who come and live here who have no Japanese, you know, blood connection, and their children are raised here, and basically they're like Japanese, but Japanese people are never going to see them as being Japanese because it's still quite a homogenous society. And I think that's one of the big changes that's coming, is that, you know, Japanese society is aging. They're going to have to embrace having more foreign support, to, you know, do elderly care. And just as a society, there's not going to be enough, the equivalent of Social Security here, to pay for the elderly in the future, the way that the population is declining. And so the government's trying all sorts of things, but I think it's going to change a lot, and that, you know, society as a whole is going to change a lot because of that. They need to have more foreign support, basically. So I think the population over time is going to, the foreign population is going to increase dramatically, is what I see coming, which I think could be a good thing in terms of being more accepting. But I feel like we're really lucky the time that we are now. I see some other wives of Japanese who had their children like 20, 30 years ago. And it sounds like it was very different in a lot of cases back then to where it is now. So I'm really grateful for that.
I've heard there's a softening around that happening. When you just see it, there's a softening in a lot of these cultures, and a mixing of people because of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
culture is now more fluid than ever,
Mm-hmm.
in really positive ways. There's more understanding happening.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. What was your, going to my usual question list, what was some of your favorite exercises
For
in your coach
coaching,
training? Yeah.
I always go straight to, well, there's actually two, I guess. One that I learned in coach training was the future self. And I think I have there's a special place for that one in my heart, because the first time I did it, I was so resistant to it. And I was just like, I don't see anything, or like, what does it matter what I'm, you know, I wanted to judge it so hard. And I think it was also like where I was in my life. I was 9 months postpartum. I was exhausted. I was breastfeeding all the time. And like the class that I took was from 11 to 1 a.m. But that was like the time I was like, well, my husband's working during the day. During the day, I have to take care of my child, and he's sleeping then. So that's the perfect time. So I was just like about 6 weeks in was when I finally realized I needed to take a nap on those days so that I could be 100% present and really get the most value. But anyway, that was one of the first exercises I think we did early on. And I was so hard on myself during that exercise. And now, so whenever I do that with clients, I always tell them about the first time I did it and how it's okay, but try to open yourself and don't judge the exercise and just let it go. And now I love it. I think it can be a life-changing tool for a lot of people. Another one I use recently is one I created myself, and that's using a positive psychology model, because a lot of people do, they have these ideas that if they come to Japan, their life is going to be perfect or magically better or so exciting and fun. And a lot of people have the opposite, that if they leave Japan, everything will magically get better. And so I use that exercise so that they can think, like, to what level did you have positive emotion? How engaged were you in your life? And they can kind of rate themselves in both countries, imagining, and to what degree are you being falsely optimistic versus, pessimistic about your current situation or something like that. So they can really think through, is it going to change? And a lot of times what they do get out of that exercise, they're like, no, it's all about my mindset. I just wanted to be happier there. And so that's such a great realization for a lot of people, I think.
That's cool. If your future self were filling out a perma wheel, what would she do? What would be the biggest difference or the biggest pop off that perma wheel?
I don't know. I think I would love to be the same as I am now. I'm like so fulfilled in what I do. And so like when I see my future self, I always do Hawaii, because we got married in Hawaii. We've been to Hawaii several times. That's like our kind of unofficial meetup with family spot now. And so like every time we go there, things slow down. It's beautiful weather. We get to eat all the food that we can, we can't eat quite as easily here in Japan. And so I just see myself in a big house, or like even like a small house, doesn't matter, looking over the ocean, huge mountain view somewhere in the neighborhood, like doing, maybe still coaching and, enjoying life, local friends, having people come visit us in Hawaii, or it doesn't have to be Hawaii. It could be Okinawa, That's
awesome.
So.
What advice would you have for someone just starting out their coach journey?
Yeah, this is one of the hard ones for me, because I think in my life and in my personality, I tend to want to be like, I'm going to give you all the details and give you all the secrets, and then you don't have to go through the struggles that I had. And the reality is there's no way you can 100%, even if you give people all of the information they need kind of starting out, it's not, they still have to work through those mindsets and those struggles and those steps by step, one by one. But I think the biggest one is just kind of trusting in yourself and showing up consistently, and just keep at it. You'll get there. It's really hard, I think, in the beginning. I have a lot of type 1 in me as well, and I think I was always trying to do it right. And at some point I was just like, I'm not going to be perfect at this, and no one's perfect, and we're all human and we have the same human brain. And so all you can do is practice and see what you're doing wrong and see what you're doing right, and how can you do more things right, and how can you improve the things you're doing wrong, and just be kind to yourself and show up for your clients and trust the process, and you'll get there.
Right on. When did you release that? And what happened like after you released the feeling of having to try to get it right?
Well, I mean, I scheduled a lot more sessions. I think that was, when I started really scheduling more and kind of putting myself out there a lot more. There was actually a period that I didn't coach for like 3 months after I finished the first part of my program. And I think it was like I was on maternity leave, and my husband had to go abroad for a month, so we went with him. And then I was kind of like, I'm trying to do too much. I'm trying to be the perfect mom. I'm trying to do this coaching thing. And I just needed to release myself. And then after that 3 months, I came back and I had my mentor coaching class, which was a really great way to get back into things, to have that support. So that also helped me to be like, ooh, I want to do more of this and I want to get better at this. So yeah, so I think that was about the point when I was like, And I think someone actually said that in a mentor coaching session, like the most important thing, trust yourself, trust the client, trust the process, and just do it kind of thing.
The three trusts.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like so much happens when a coach releases trying to solve it or trying to trying to make each session feel like there needs to be a tangible outcome that necessitates them signing up to be coached. This decision is so like what we came up with is so valuable that obviously coaching is really useful, right? Like there's this need to try to prove the usefulness of coaching. It took me 2 years to release that, but it seems like the program is built to really help people release that as quickly as possible, and a lot of things open up. What do you find yourself when you're working with a client? What do you find yourself trying to do instead?
Yeah. Again, like trust the process. Like I always say that to clients as well. I never say this is the result you're going to get by the end of this, but I will say we can aim towards a result and see how many steps we can take in this process. But yeah, I think that has been a game changer in terms of people coming to me who say, like, what can I expect? I'm like, what do you want to get out of this? Or what do you want to create? And kind of putting the responsibility back on the client. Like, this is your space and this is your time. And what do you want to use it for? Has been a big, game changer for me, rather than like, oh, by the end of this, you will have changed your job. But the crazy thing is that happens a lot.
I know, right? I know, it's even the best. Like when you release it happens quicker. It's the weirdest flip-flop you can experience as a coach.
Yeah. I had one client, I worked with her for like 3 weeks, and the first session she thought she kind of was in the mindset that she was going to lose her job. She had a bad performance review, and her boss wasn't even actually Japanese, but he was from another high context, which means very indirect culture. And so I was like, okay, I see some similarities there. And so we kind of walked through like the cultural aspects and how she came to the realization that she was afraid of her boss, and that's why she wasn't showing up when she was in a room with him, and she wasn't showing herself as she actually is. And so he could see, I'm sure, that she's very competent, but he was kind of taking advantage of that from a cultural standpoint. Probably someone did that to him in the past. And around 3 weeks in, she sent me an email saying I was just offered a promotion to director from that boss.
Wow.
And I was like, like nobody comes in expecting that kind of thing. And I don't think that's a realistic expectation to necessarily have, especially in Japan. But like, she was about to quit her job. She thought she was getting fired. And 3 weeks later, she's got this huge promotion. And, yeah, or at least the offer, it's crazy.
It is a little wild when you look at, coaching stories, that things happen that you can't predict, because it's almost like people are so tied up in trying to solve like a little local problem. But what coaching really does is it gets to a larger, all-encompassing problem. And when that starts to shift, it's like tectonic plates, monumental things happen that you can't really predict. Totally get that. I've seen it. I just had a conversation with a client I'm working with, creating demos for the executive program. He's a CFO, and he gave me some updates today, and it's mind blowing. I want to save it for the demos, but it's amazing to see how this process works. So, and you're also very much in the executive space. Where do you see to what degree are these coaching concepts making it into the usual way of doing business?
Yeah. So I think that's also like my ultimate goal is to get a bit more into in executive coaching in the future. I've actually worked with executives directly in HR in the past. So like I have that experience, but most of the people I've been working up until now are in, various fields in, various industries in Japan. Some of them are middle managers though. And so that's been really interesting. seeing kind of what struggles they are having coming to Japan and only having worked for like a year or two. And so that's like the one side is helping individuals. But then on the other hand, I feel like coaching, what I'm seeing more and more in Japan as it's expanding, is the idea of training leaders to be coaches. Like you shouldn't, like leader and coach should be synonymous kind of in business. And I think especially in cultures like Japan, that is so important. One thing I talk a lot about is power harassment. I've been power harassed like 3 times now, like pretty serious power harassment. My husband was power harassed a couple times in his jobs as well. And so it's like, I don't want to say it's the culture, but part of the culture can create that expectation because it's that seniority system that you shouldn't really be questioning the people above you, and that if you are pushing back too much or putting out too many ideas, you could be seen as kind of affecting the face of the people above you. And so that kind of power struggle can really create some problems. And so if people were trained like, oh, you are this way, this is the type of leader you are because you were treated that way, and so your brain has wired to think that what you're doing is just normal behavior, when in reality this is really toxic and bad for companies to have people that are leading this way or that are in management and doing these things.
Right.
And I think it is slowly changing. This is very much also in linked with the fact that in Japan, it's very hard to lay people off. Whereas in the States, I think it's much easier if people are treating people badly and it's not improving. It's a bit easier to, cut people. And here, it's just really, really difficult to do that. So it's those 2 factors, I think, make it so that these people just keep going up and up and keep power harassing. And so the potential there is they could be power harassing hundreds of thousands of people throughout their career.
Wow.
And then in turn, those people could be becoming very bitter and unhappy. And when they get into management, they may be like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to treat you the same because if I can survive it, obviously you can. And so that's really hard. So I feel like coaching, there's just so much potential to change that. If you see this happening, you don't have to lay them off, but you could force them to go into performance improvement program where they have to learn to coach for 6 months. And then that could change. Can you imagine how that would change if they learned
forced coach learning?
Forced coaching, like
forced coach
but
training.
Can you imagine though, when you've been power harassed by someone and showing up to work one day when they ask you questions about how you are and what you think and are trying to get your buy-in for an idea instead of just yelling at you or saying, why do you even talk? Or, these really negative things that tend to happen. And again, I don't want to say it's just Japan. It's definitely not just Japan. I'm sure that happens around the world, but it is a big problem here. So,
well, what's interesting is, so I'm running an organization with the Moise. And so we have a staff of 10 full-time people and 12 contractors, right, around the world. But we've never been in corporations. I was a Latin teacher and I started this and just built it up, just thing after thing. But I have worked with a number of executives, and some of the things I've heard are insane. What is this? This is the weirdest, most convoluted situation I've ever heard. And it seems like, unfortunately, that's pretty normal in a lot of these organizations, especially the higher up you go, the odder the situations can get. How are you? I mean, more from like just a marketing standpoint, I'm always interested in this idea of coaching as a movement, and it seems ripe for that. And a lot of the work that you're doing, and it seems like you're in the spot to bring more empathy and caring into these spaces. How does that show up in your messaging to these companies, or how you're attracting clients?
Yeah. So at an individual level,
Right.
yeah, I think it's a lot about just a variety of things at once. Like if, for example, you wanted to start a business in like yoga, for example, everyone knows what that is. They know the value, they know what it is. Or massage, for example. If you're a masseuse, everyone knows it feels good to get a massage, and you don't really have to educate. And so with coaching, it's kind of this interesting place where you're educating, but trying not to do it in a way that is like too much, because you don't want people to think you're like over educating as a way of compensating for something, or I don't know how to explain that. But at the same time, you're also trying to communicate the value and how valuable it is, and the fact that it's not therapy. And I think there can sometimes be a stigma there. And also your personal value, like what are you bringing to the table? What kind of experience, qualifications, et cetera, that you have. And so those are just like, you know, the tip of the iceberg. There's so many things that you have to communicate. Whereas a masseuse could just, you know, advertise and maybe post some client testimonials. Oh yes, she did a great job, great personality, or good to be around, or that kind of thing. And I don't want to say it's simple, because business I don't think is ever simple, but it can be really challenging. And so it's definitely been a process kind of learning how to do that, and putting myself out there. And also, I think in the end, it's all about being authentic. I think that's probably the most important thing. If you're authentic, it goes a long way in communicating what you want to do. So yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question.
I'm always curious because it feels like, you know, a lot of what the work that we're doing in corporations, like a lot of the bigger projects that we're doing with some of these organizations, is it's as much of trying to have a culture shift in the organization than it is to work with any one individual. And it seems like these culture shifts, you know, having worked with a number of these, you know, number of different places, some organizations have a culture where they embrace growth mindset, where there is an openness to asking for help, where people do have an openness. This is the only way I can describe it. And then other places, it's not that way. It feels like, well, I don't want to share because my supervisor's in my same coach training, and if I share, then that's not going to be uncomfortable, and I don't want that. You know, so it seems like the other cultures, it's not. There's unsafety happening.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And I think it ties in with the Japanese. I don't want to say the Japanese culture again, but it is a culture of like, you don't ask, you know. Read the air, kuki o yomu. This is the synonymous to being socially awkward. Kuki o yomenai hito, someone who cannot read the air, is socially awkward. And nobody wants to be socially awkward. You should always fit within the group. You should always, you know, deru kugi ga utareru, the nail that sticks out shall be hammered down. It's such a culture of, you know, don't offend the boss and do what the group wants and keep the peace. The wa is so important here. And so traditionally that's the way it's been. And so it's just so hard to change if you don't change from the top.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, working with a coach or teaching coaching to leaders, requiring that as part of their promotion system, which is kind of what I did at my previous job at Toray, where we would do like intercultural communication training. But I think at such a much bigger level, like one time is not enough. Like having a 2-week training and not being able to work that whole time and getting stressed out and half focusing while you half try to do your work on the side after attending these full day lectures, and then having no training for the next however many years. It's not enough. Like it has to be regular the way that coaching is, so that it really gets into people's brains and they can raise that self-awareness and figure out how they can bring that self-awareness to their day-to-day so that it can really make effective change.
And then you have to deal with loud, exuberant Americans who come in and deal with that. Like, I'm sure there's a whole category that they would put people like me. If I ever went to Japan and gave a talk, they would put me in. It'd be interesting. Wow. How can people, so we're going to put this on our blog. We're going to put it out there, all of our channels and resources. How can people find you? What's the way that people can get in contact with you?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. So I have a webpage, which is www.homeinjapan.com. I just started a YouTube channel, which the link is just like a bunch of letters at the end. So, I mean, I could send it to you, or if you search on YouTube, hopefully it'll come up.
Yeah, we'll have links on there. Yeah. So what's your channel about? So
I literally just started it. I put out my first video like last night that I have just been like trying to edit and then retake and then edit and then retake for the longest time, because it is such a process learning to record yourself with like your face and talking and get it looking natural. But I just went ahead and put the first video up, and I think I'm going to make a post about it on Instagram that, you just have to take that first step and get it out there. But the first one is just a very simple one about transition coaching. But going forward, I want to talk a lot about my experience in Japan, working in English teaching, working in Japanese corporations, working in foreign corporations. I worked in 2 different Japanese corporations at like the corporate level, and the cultures were entirely different, which was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about that, how, there's culture, but there's also like the organizational culture, and then your department culture, your team culture. And also like studying Japanese. I think a lot of people are interested. They hear that I have the highest level of the Japanese language placement test. And they're like, that's impossible. How did you do that? And it's like, the thing is, it's not impossible, because if you've seen someone else doing it out there, it means it is possible and you can do it too, right? So I think that's going to be a lot of fun to talk about. And also the fact that just having that JLPT N1 does not make it easy. Like I had the JLPT N1 when I got my job at Toray, and it was still really hard, learning a new job and doing these management training programs for 2 weeks and standing up every day and speaking in front of people. I found so much energy from getting to meet, management from all over the globe, but also hearing what they had to say about having a Japanese headquarters versus the last company I worked at had an American headquarters. We were located in Japan, and we were starting up offices in APAC. So it was like 3 different layers of culture just in terms of the nationalities, plus the organizational culture, plus the culture in Europe. Is really a lot of mental gymnastics being in middle management in that company. In such, yeah.
I can just imagine the degree of complexity of misunderstandings is probably astounding.
Yeah.
Especially given language barriers on top of it and time zone differences and all of it. It's a pretty wild thing. Wow, Katie, that sounds like an amazing field, a rich, fulfilling field, and growing too, because the world's not stopping. We're not slowing down our connections with each other. It's only, I think, if you look historically after pandemics, there is a flourishing afterwards that happens because people are forced to do something differently. And then when the restrictions are eased and we can go back, it's almost like we've seen what it's like to live more remote. It's going to be integrated into everything that we're doing. I imagine your work is just going to become more and more important as the years tick by.
Yeah, it's a really fortunate time to get to do what I do. And I think I was talking to another coach a few weeks ago, and she said as well, like, this is the time to work in coaching, and especially with corporations, because I think so many corporations have realized how crucial, well-being trainings and this type of thing is, and how they really, if they haven't been doing it up until now, they need to get on it, because when things like this happen, everything shuts down. And especially Japan, I don't know if you've heard about the stamp culture here. Like everything has to be stamped. When organizations and just going to the city office and filling out papers, if you don't have the right stamp that's been registered, you can't get anything done. And you can't live like that during a pandemic. It's not, responsible to have people coming in to fill out paperwork when it could be done this day and age through email or something. So I think Japan as well has been like, what are we going to do about the stamp culture? And if we don't need the stamp culture, what else don't we need?
Right. Things are shaking up a little bit. Kate, it's a pleasure I'm thinking in my head, I know Moises is going to want to go to Japan. She was telling me, she's like, oh, you're going to talk to someone from Japan today. It's been on our list of places that we've always wanted to visit. So we will definitely be in contact if we're over there once these restrictions lift. And it's been on my list. We were going to do a program in Singapore for a little bit, and that COVID happened. But getting deeper into Asia it's been on our roadmap. And I have a feeling next 5 years we'll make it over there.
Awesome. We'll look forward to seeing you when you come.
It'd be fun to be there. And thank you all of who are listening live and those listening to our recording of the podcast. My name is John. This is an interview with Katie Hurd. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for being here and part of the Coaching to Flourish podcast. And thank you, everyone. I'll see you next week.